This is Chicken Philosophy B-Sides, The Darkening Age, Part 4. And, yeah. So on what we call here on Chicken Philosophy B-Sides, what we call A-Sides is just Chicken Philosophy, right? And right now, there's the cycle of 15 known as the Monsoon 15. And at the end of each quinary, end of each group of 5, we do one episode of Chicken Philosophy B-Sides, alternating between the Darkening Age and Team of Rivals about Abraham Lincoln. So now you know what's going on. So check out A-Sides if you aren't already on A-Sides. Click through and subscribe. Okay. You ready? I had originally conceived... Oh, if you want to start at the beginning of the Darkening Age, here's the Darkening Age playlist. We're jumping in the middle, kind of, so... Anyway, I had originally conceived of this book as a travel log. It would be interesting, I thought, to follow Damascus as he zigzagged across the Mediterranean, a pagan St. Paul, Syria, Damascus, Baghdad, parts of Egypt, and the southern border of Turkey. All places that he had traveled to were by no means easy to reach, but they were just about achievable. However, in the years between coming up with that idea and writing this book, the reality of doing so became impossible. Since then, and as I write, the Syrian civil war has left parts of Syria under the control of the new Islamic Caliphate. In 2014, within certain areas of Syria, music was banned and books were burned. The British Foreign Office advised against all travel to the north of the Sinai Peninsula. In 2015, Islamic State militants started bulldozing the ancient Assyrian city of Nimrud, just south of Mosul in Iraq, because it was idolatrous. Images went around the world showing Islamic militants toppling statues around 3 millennia old from their plinths, then taking hammers to them. False gods must be destroyed. In Palmyra, the remnants of the great statue of Athena that had been carefully repaired by archaeologists was attacked again. Once again, Athena was beheaded. Once again, her arm was sheared off. In case you hadn't already gotten the parallel between the ancient zealots who burned down Alexandria and their present-day counterparts in the world. Okay. My imagined journey had become impossible. As a result, this book has become a sort of historical travelogue instead. It travels throughout the Roman Empire, pausing at certain places and certain times that are significant. As with any travelogue, by the way, I didn't want to just let that slide, let that go misinterpretable. If you would like to know my actual position on things, check out the Green Pedal, in which I read aloud the writings of Hafiz and Ibn al-Arabi. All right. So, yeah, the Fremen I think are pretty cool too. But the thing is, like, when there are other people's statues, let people be at the point that they're at on their path. If you get to a point where you need to smash your own statues, have at it. And I get it. I've been there, you know. Sometimes you need to transcend form. And you don't need to actually smash things to do that, you know. Maybe that's my inner Martin Luther. Orange Pedal starts with all the Martin Luther. He was the one who's like, don't smash the statues, just don't worship the statues. What's wrong with you? It's basic shit. talking to his fellow Protestant at the time. As with any travelogue, each of the places I have focused on is a personal choice and, in a sense, an arguable one. I have chosen Palmyra as a beginning, as it was in the east of the empire in the mid-380s that sporadic violence against the old gods and their temples escalated into something far more serious. But equally, I could have chosen an attack on an earlier temple, or a later one. That is why it is a beginning, not the beginning. I have chosen Athens in the years around AD 529 as an ending. But again, I could equally have chosen a city further east whose inhabitants, when they failed to convert to Christianity, were massacred and their arms and legs cut off and strung up in the streets as a warning to others. Yeah, don't just keep jerking off to your, oh, the poor Portuguese in Japan getting tortured to death. Yeah, that's the exception, not the rule. Anyway. This is a book about the Christian destruction of the classical world. The Christian assault was not the only one. Fire, flood, invasion at time, Invasion and time itself all played their part, but this book focuses on Christianity's assault in particular. But, this is not to say that the church didn't also preserve things. It did. But the story from themselves, like going around smashing things, but we'll keep some things, right? Of Christianity's good works. But the story of Christianity's good works in this period has been told again and again. Such books proliferate in libraries and bookshops. The history and the sufferings of those whom Christianity defeated have not been. Fair enough. This book concentrates on them. The area covered is vast, and so this is a piecemeal history that darts about through geography and time. It makes no apology for that. The period covered is too long for a linear crawl through the past, and the resulting narrative would be quite simply too dull. This is also narrative history. I have tried to give a sense of what it felt like to stand before an ancient temple, what it smelt like to enter one, of how pleasing the afternoon light was when it fell through the steam in an ancient bathhouse. Gotta love those ancient bathhouses, right? Again, I make no apology for that either. This approach has its problems. Who can really know what an ancient temple smelt like without visiting one? But try not to recreate the world. But not to try to recreate the world is an untruthfulness of another kind. The ancients did not move through a world delineated merely by clean historical periods and battle dates. They lived in a world where the billowing smoke of sacrifices filled the streets on feast days, where people defecated behind the statues in the center of Rome, where the light glistened on the wet, naked bodies of young nymphs in theaters. Both dates and bodies are essential to understanding people of this period. Any attempt to write about ancient history is fraught with difficulty. Hilary Mantel once said that history is not the past, ... It is what is left in the sieve when the centuries have run through it. End quote. Late antiquity offers slimmer pickings in the sieve than most. The little that does remain there is therefore often hotly contested, and some of it has been argued over by scholars for centuries. Something as simple sounding as an edict can attract years of disagreement between those who consider it seminal and those who relegate it to the status of a mere letter. I have footnoted some of the most significant controversies, but not every one. It would have been impossible, not to mention unreadable. What remains, whether quarreled over or not, should be treated with caution. As with all ancient history, the writers I quoted had limited viewpoints and their own agendas. When St. Chrysostom gloated that the writings of the Greeks had been obliterated, he was more voicing a hope than stating a fact. When St. Martin's biographer wrote glowingly of how Martin had violently burnt and demolished temples throughout Gaul, The aim was less to report than to inspire. You too can burn pagan temples. No, propaganda, we would call such writings now. Every point these authors make is arguable. Every writer I quote is fallible. They were, in short, human, and we should read them with caution, but we should still read them, as their tales are still worth telling. My narrative opens in Egypt, as monasticism is born, then moves to Rome, as this new religion is beginning to make an appearance there. It then travels to northern Turkey, to Bithynia, where the very first record of the Christians by a non-Christian was written. It goes to Alexandria in Egypt, where some of the worst desecration of all took place. I think it's safe to say that it's not the first time that a non-Christian wrote about a Christian. It's that it was the first time a non-Christian wrote about a Christian and it didn't get burned in Alexandria. Really. It goes to Alexandria in Egypt, where some of the worst desecration of all took place, and it goes far into the deserts of Syria, where some of the strangest players in this story existed. Monks who, for the love of God, lived out their entire lives standing on pillars, or in trees, or in cages. And it travels, in the end, to Athens, the city where Western philosophy may be said to have really begun, and where, in AD 529, it ended. Can be said is doing a lot of heavy lifting on the definition of Western philosophy there. Those who are familiar with A-sides know that my alarm bells went off, but I've gone on about that too many times, that it's all calloused, it's all burnt over, the scar is basically... Never mind. The destruction chronicled in this book is immense, and yet it has been all but forgotten by the modern world. One of the most influential church historians would describe the moment when Christianity took control as the moment at which all oppression ceased, a time when men who once dared not look up greeted each other with smiling faces and shining eyes. Later historians would join in a chorus of agreement. Why would the Romans not have been happy to convert? They were, runs this argument, sensible people, and had never really believed their own religion anyway, with its undignified priapic Jupiters and lustful Venuses. Oh, come on, who wouldn't believe in that? No, runs the argument, the Romans had been Christians in waiting, ready and willing to give up their absurd and confusing polytheistic rituals as soon as a sensible, for which read monotheistic, religion appeared on the scene. As Samuel Johnson would put it, pithy as ever, quote, the heathens were easily converted because they had nothing to give up. Ha 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 ha. End quote. The ha 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 was editorial comment. He was wrong. Many converted happily to Christianity, it is true, but many did not. Many Romans and Greeks did not smile as they saw their religious liberties removed, their books burned, their temples destroyed, and their ancient statues shattered by thugs with hammers. This book tells their story. It is a book that unashamedly mourns the largest destruction of art that human history has ever seen. It is a book about the tragedies behind the triumph of Christianity. A note on vocabulary. I have tried to avoid using the word pagan throughout, except when conveying the thoughts or deeds of a Christian protagonist. It was a pejorative and insulting word, and was not one that any non-Christian at the time would have willingly used of themselves. It was also a Christian innovation. Before Christianity's ascendancy, few people would have thought to describe themselves by their religion at all. After Christianity, the world became split forevermore along religious boundaries, and words appeared to demarcate these divisions. One of the most common was pagan. Initially, this word had been used to refer to a civilian rather than a soldier. After Christianity, the soldiers in question were not Roman legionaries, but those who had enlisted in Christ's army. Later, Christian writers concocted false, unflattering etymologies for it. They said it was related to the word pagus, to the peasants and the field. It was not, but such slurs stuck, and paganism acquired an unappealing whiff of the rustic and the backward, a taint it carries to this day. I have also, where possible, generally avoided ascribing modern nationalities to ancient characters who have instead described them by the language they chiefly wrote in. Thus, the orator Libanius, though he was born and lived in Syria, I describe not as Syrian, but as Greek. But I wanted to mention it here in the introduction, just so there's no confusion. Yeah, I'm saying. This was a cosmopolitan world where anyone, anywhere from Alexandria to Athens, wasn't St. Patrick, an Italian living in England, that went to Ireland once? Anyway, thus the orator, yeah, no, we read that. This was a cosmopolitan world where anyone, anywhere from Alexandria to Athens, might consider themselves a Hellene, or a Hellen, a Greek, and I have tried to reflect that. I, at times, for sheer ease of reading, used the word religion to refer to the broad spectrum of cults worshipped by Greco-Roman society prior to the introduction of Christianization. This word has its problems, not least the fact that it implies a more centralized and coherent structure than what in practice existed. It is, however, more elegant than many of the cumbersome alternatives. One final note. Many, many wonderful people, many, many good people are impelled by their Christian faith to do many, many good things. I know because I am an almost daily beneficiary of such goodness myself. This book is not intended as an attack on these people, and I hope they will not see it as such. But it is undeniable that there have been, that there still are, those who use monotheism and its weapons to terrible ends. Christianity is a greater and a stronger religion when it admits this, and challenges it. Chapter 1. The Invisible Army. Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, says Luke in chapter 10, verse 19. Satan knew how to tempt Saint Antony. One day, in a far corner of the Roman Empire, in Egypt, this prosperous young man caught the attention of the evil one when he did something that was at the time very unusual. Aged about 20, Antony walked out of his house, sold his possessions, gave all his land away, and went to live in a pigsty. The Roman world of AD 270 was not one that usually celebrated the simple life. Indeed, if he had looked out across this realm at the time, then Satan might have allowed himself a satisfied glow that his work had been well done. The sins of lust, gluttony, and avarice stalked the land, where once the aristocrats of Rome had prided themselves on wearing simple home-woven tunics. Now the wealthy strode about sweating under scarlet fabrics that gleamed with embroidered gold. Women were even worse, wearing jewel-encrusted sandals and expensive silks so diaphanous that every curve of their bodies could be seen even when fully dressed, where once upon a time Roman noblemen had boasted of enjoying fortifyingly, cold swims in the swirling Tiber. This generation preferred to go to the baroquely decorated bathhouses, taking with them countless rattling silver bottles of ointment. The behavior inside those steamy rooms was said to be wanton, Women stripped naked and allowed slaves, their fingers gleaming with oil, to rub every inch of their bodies. Men and women bathed together, each one divesting themselves of their modesty, as one observer put it, along with their tunic. That writer, in his embarrassment, only managed to chunter in abstract nouns about lust and licentious indulgence that might brew in those humid rooms. The frescoes in the Pompeian bathhouses were rather more precise. In one changing room, above a shelf, where bathers left their clothes, was a small painting of a man performing oral sex on a woman. Indeed, above each of the shelves in that room was a different image, a threesome above one, lesbian sex above another, and so on. Oh, go on. You don't need to abridge your list. A rather more memorable method, it has been speculated, of marking where you left your clothes than a locker number. Had certain, I guess, it's like, did we park on Mickey or Goofy? Oh no, I think it was Goofy 2A. Like Disneyland, never mind. Had certain looked at the Empire's dining tables, then he might have concluded with satisfaction that the behavior here was little better. Centuries before, the Emperor Augustus had, somewhat ostentatiously, relished a simple diet of coarse bread and handmade cheese. Such parsimoniousness didn't last. Soon, gourmands were supping 100-year-old wines cooled with snow water out of jeweled goblets. And supping? What the fuck is supping? Really does say supping. Though not even those at the best tables could be sure of the best food and drink in this showy hierarchical world. Hosts stratified the wine they served their guests, giving the worst wine to the least important diners, the mediocre wine to the mediocre men, and the best wine to the best men. The young Antony, before he set out to that pigsty, had been the sort of man who could, in time, have earned the finer wines at dinner. He was a provincial, true, but he was also youthful, handsome, fit, and healthy. He had been offered a reasonable education, even if, in the time-honored way of privileged young men, he had declined to make the most of it. And he was wealthy. He had recently inherited hundreds of acres of enviably good farmland. He was at just the age when a man ought to start making his mark on the world. Instead, Antony abandoned it all, not long after his parents' deaths. He had been in church when he heard a chapter from the Gospel of Matthew being read. Quote, "If thou wilt be perfect," and, quote, it said, quote, "Go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven," end quote. And he had promptly done so. 15 years later, Antony, soon he would become so famous that he could be known by his name alone, decided to go even farther, setting out to live in a deserted Roman fort on the edge of the Egyptian desert, where he stayed for 20 years. I think we met him in Carl Jung's Black Books, right? Later, he would go further still, making his home on a mountain by the Red Sea. He would stay there until he died in AD 356. Antony was not one of the empire's gourmands, no Sicilian lampreys for him. Instead, he ate only bread, salt, and water, and precious little of that, eating only once a day after sunset. It can't have been a meal to look forward to. While he was in the fort, bread was brought to him only twice a year. Little about his life would have whetted the appetite of an aesthete. What a line! Oh God, let's see the tagline for this episode, in which something about whetting the appetite of an aesthete. Okay. Antony slept on a simple rush mat, covering himself with a goat's hair blanket. Often he didn't sleep at all, preferring to spend the whole night awake in prayer, while other young men daubed themselves with expensive perfumes and ointments, like you do. And plucked their hair so assiduously that, the moralists muttered, it was impossible to tell the jawlines of young men from those of women. Antony scorned his body. Oh, right, while they were doing that, he scorned his body. Okay, he assaulted it on a daily basis. What do you mean? Refusing to use oils to anoint and clean it, instead wore a hair shirt. Oh, and never washed. Ew. He only cleaned the mud from his feet when he happened to cross a stream. It was said that no one saw his body naked until he died. But everybody did. Passed it around the town. Doesn't say that. Doesn't say that. Might be true, but, knowing Catholics. His was a life devoted to isolation, humility, or to give it a less Christian gloss, humiliation, and self-abnegation. Self-abnegation. All right. Yet, just a few decades after his death, Antony became a celebrity, like Van Gogh. That's what I'm aiming for. Just a few decades after. No. The story of his life, written down by a bishop named Athanasius. Is it the Athanasius we're familiar with for making the list of that became the New Testament and everything else had to be burned? Maybe. What century was this? Yeah, maybe. 356 in Alexandria. Yeah, that would have been the same Athanasius. Written down by a bishop named Athanasius, was a literary sensation. Oh, his life. Whose life? Antony. So Athanasius wrote about Antony and then was like, only these 27 books are acceptable, and that became the New Testament. It was in Alexandria in the 300s. Click, click, click. Right. Devoured by readers from Egypt to Italy and remained a bestseller for centuries. Young men read this account of punishing, self-denial, and inspired, headed out into the deserts in imitation. So many men went, it was said that the desert was made a city by monks. Centuries later, Antony would be revered as the founding father of monasticism. So probably the one that Carl met in the desert wasn't the original, but one of the imitators. One of the most influential men in the history of Christianity. Centuries later, Antony would be revered as the founding father of monasticism. One of the most influential men in the history of Christianity. A few years after his death, people had already started to recognize his importance. When St. Augustine heard the story of Antony's austere life, he was apparently so moved by its power that he rushed out of the house into the garden, tore his hair, and beat his head with his hands. Such simple men, he said, were rising up and taking heaven by force. Silly Augustine. Tricks are for kids. So this has been part 4 of the Darkening Age on Chicken Philosophy B-Sides. If you'd like the other Chicken Philosophy B-Sides, click here. It's the Abraham Lincoln one. If you'd like this one, you can click down here. And we'll see you over on A-Sides. Link is in the description. Peace.